In 1969, the Beatles released their album Abbey Road, and my friend Rich and I are going to talk about it on this episode of Records with Ray. So this is all supposed to be clues as to Paul is dead. So, and supposedly, John is dressed in white. He's supposed to be the priest. Ringo is dressed in black. He is the caretaker. Paul isn't wearing shoes because in certain cultures, they bury their dead without any shoes on. And George Harrison is supposed to be the gravedigger. There's a license plate right here that says
Linda
20.
McCartney widowed. It's supposed to be. Yeah,
Linda
it's all this
McCartney,
silly stuff.
28 as if he would have been 28 years old.
28 if. 28
if.
Yeah. Which, come on.
And they're in the road.
Yeah, they're in the road. They're about to get run over.
Paul McCartney just supposedly died in a car crash.
And they replaced him with some other Paul McCartney.
And if you go over here, supposedly that's supposed to be a three Beatles.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of people smoking way too much dope.
This is your favorite album.
That is my favorite Beatles album. That's actually my favorite album of all time.
Favorite album of all time.
Yeah, and that's and I like a lot of stuff. And they've had so much great stuff. I mean, what can you say that hasn't been said about them already? And
well, we're gonna talk.
We're gonna try.
Well, what's important is I'm curious to know why this one out of all of them.
Okay.
Because it's a hard question to answer.
It is. So for me, the background on this is when I got into music at a very young age. Even when I was a very little kid, there was records around the house. We had the old hi-fi, that was like kind of like a wooden thing with some legs on it, and then the flip top, and then you had the changer, and the whole bit.
Yeah.
And so I'd be playing the records, and I had this cousin, my cousin Diane, who was a teenager at the time.
Yeah.
And this is, let's say, I was born in 1967, so we'll say early 70s. And while I was listening to AM radio and hearing like the Jackson 5 and the Osmond Brothers and, whatever else, Argent, Hold Your Head Up was a big hit back then, and different.
Hold your head up.
Yeah.
Who is that?
That Argent.
Argent.
And, stuff like that. And I, big into, WABC, music, radio, and listening to like Cousin Brucey and all that shit.
This is the 70s.
This is the early 70s.
No, wait, Cousin Brucey was, I guess he would have been back.
So, Ron Lundy and all these guys that were, all these big, East Coast DJs. And, but I had this older cousin who would babysit me sometimes, and she turned me on to David Bowie, Alice Cooper, all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah.
And, so I'm like 4 or 5 year old kid, listening, just like a yo-yo or whatever. And then the next thing would be, Alice Cooper, School's Out or something like that. And one of the first albums I remember playing was Hard Day's Night.
Yeah.
We had the soundtrack to that.
Okay.
And so I used to listen to that. So that was my first exposure to the Beatles. And then I was probably about 4 or 5 when Let It Be came out. And I distinctly remember hearing that on the radio. And then at some point I was probably like 5 or 6, maybe even 7. At some point, my dad used to every now and then just bring home albums, and it seemed like it was more of a random thing, like not like I want this album. It's like I'm just going to buy some records and just sort of like there was some. I mean, I've got some in my collection. It's like
wow.
I have no idea why my father bought them, and some of the stuff's really random. But he came home with Let It Be, and Let It Be just lived on my turntable for, it still comes back because it's a great album. It's a very anachronistic one from the Beatles because A, it's produced by Phil Spector. B, it's cobbled together from the shit show of the sessions that you could see in the movie, and but it's really it's got some great songs in this and that. Fast forward to about mid 70s, probably it was after Saturday Night Fever, the Bee Gees were huge, and the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton made this movie called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which is the cinematic equivalent of like a cocaine overdose. It's just you could like just see it, like, you know, it's just crazy. And the weird thing about it was, and it was a big thing, and I'm a little kid, and I'm just hearing all, I'm just like, you know, well, you know, this is all the hit stuff. I was still listening to a lot of AM radio.
Yeah.
And so that came out, and that was a big deal, because, you know, it was post Saturday Night Fever. It was Frampton, like, right after Frampton Comes Alive, so this was like,
Yeah.
you know, this was just crazy, you know, like the two, you know, hugest acts in music, you know, just putting this movie out with like George Burns and Steve Martin and Aerosmith at the height of their like just being wasted. The Aerosmith gets the shit kicked out of them by the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton in the movie, so that should, you know, there's an idea. But the movie was called Sgt. Pepper, but it had a lot of the songs from this. It had the whole side two, pretty much every song on side two except the end was on that. So was Come Together.
Yeah.
Maxwell Silver Hammer, Oh Darling. And I think I want, but like almost this whole album is on there, even more so in some ways than Sgt. Pepper. And
well, why did they call that movie Sgt. Pepper then?
But it's for the stupid story,
for the imagery, I guess, or something like that. But is that I never saw that movie, but is it just like a celebration for the Beatles, sort of? But they're just going to do takes on the songs, 70s versions.
Like I said, it was just way too much cocaine.
Wow.
And you know, somebody got the bright idea, somebody greenlit it, got the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton attached, and just ran with it. And it's a spectacle to behold.
I guess I got to see it.
You should see it, but it is terrible.
Did it do well?
Not so much. Not any. Not. No, it was fairly universally panned.
Okay.
But being a little kid,
then.
And I heard all these. They did that whole side. They had all that, you know, all your Mean Mr. Mustard, Polythene Pam. She came in through the bathroom window.
They did all those.
Yeah, they did all that.
Like in a row. Like how
pretty much, yeah. And I remember going, these are kind of cool songs. I never heard those. Those are the Beatles. And then a few years after that, I'm a teenager, and a buddy of mine's older brother, I start hearing all these songs from the Sgt. Pepper movie, except it's clearly the Beatles doing it. Yeah. And I'm like, wait a minute. What album is that? So he's like, oh, it's Abbey Road. And so as soon as I could get, my parents to, go get it for me, because I was a kid, they went out and got Abbey Road, and that lived on my turntable forever. And it's one of those records that, like, it just, the more you listen to it, like, the more comes out of it.
Oh, yeah.
And there's just so, like the song, first of all, it's the Beatles. The songwriting is just unimpeachable.
Yeah.
It's really unbelievable. And every member of the Beatles shines on it too. Like, even as far as songwriting, I mean, like, we'll start with Ringo. Octopus's Garden, that's probably the best Ringo song from the Beatles years, arguably. And it's got its own little thing, and the Beatles always kind of tried to make whatever their Ringo song, because they always threw Ringo a song, and they always really kind of liked working on those, as opposed to like the story is like they kind of like tolerated George Harrison's stuff a little more, just more tolerated it than encouraged it. But let's get Ringo a song, And I think it's like they thought of him as kind of like the kid brother, but like move on. George Harrison, I mean, for him to get a song on an album, he had to write something.
Well,
or he had to write Here Comes the Sun, two of which are like two of the greatest,
wouldn't those two probably be the most famous songs from Abbey Road? Come Together, I guess.
Come Together, something. Yeah, I would say as far as just individual songs, yeah, you'd probably say that the George Harrison ones are maybe the most commercially successful.
Yeah.
But to me, the tour de force is side two. And
Let's talk about side two
Side two.
because this is the reason why I love Abbey Road so
Yeah.
much, and it's the first time I think they've ever did this where they just did all these songs
yeah,
in a row,
yeah, and a lot of it is
and all those songs are different.
yeah, and they
Way
jump all
different.
over, and it's like. It's kind of like they're like, we've got this little, here's this. Oh, well, that's great. We got about, a minute or so of that. Oh, here's a minute or
Yep.
so of something else awesome. Oh, well, we're going to take a big left turn here and show you something else. And side two is just about, from, roughly from You Never Give Me Your Money on is mostly McCartney. It's mostly McCartney's baby.
Gotcha.
And, John shows up, singing, some stuff, but it's like, it's clearly
Polythene Pam.
Pam. You hear him and he's got some killer stuff on side one,
Yeah.
but it's Paul's baby. And just the breadth of what they're doing, just all the different stuff and going from just kind of silly and like over the whole album really, but like side two just really, just blew me away from
Yeah.
the first minute. And, and it's all thanks to the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton.
So what's the story with the end? They said, is that Ringo playing the drums, or is that Paul McCartney playing
On
the
the end,
drums?
it's Ringo.
It is Ringo.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Three
don't-
guitar soloists, though.
Yes.
Isn't it like Paul, Eric
Paul George.
Clap-
No, it's Paul, George, and John.
Is it?
What they did was, from if I remember my Beatles lore correctly, they after they did what they did, Ringo didn't like to be a showy drummer, but they convinced him to do that little solo piece in it. But when it got to the point of where they wanted to do the solo thing, they just the three of them got in a room, set up 3 amps, their 3 guitars, and just you go, and just had that couple of bar that they each do, going trading back and forth, and just going on for a while. And you could hear 3 distinct guitar players too. I mean,
Yeah.
their sounds, you could tell who's George, who's Paul, and who's John. And it's the thing about the album in general too is after the shit show that was Let It Be and trying to do that, this album was, come on guys, let's get together and make one album the way we used to. Let's make a Beatles album.
From
put
what
a
I
stamp on it.
understand, yeah, we were like Let It Be got released after
Right.
Abbey Road, but technically this was the last album that
Yes.
they made that they recorded.
Right.
And from what I've going through my Beatles lore too, from the interviews I heard, like they went in going into the studio knowing
Right.
that they're like, okay, this is it.
Yeah.
This is our last hurrah, and then we're gonna be
Yeah.
done. So they actually did make a point to like.
And and both, and they all had started to kind of branch out a little bit and work on some of their own stuff by then.
I think what's incredible about the Beatles, I mean, I consider them to be the best rock and roll band.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there.
And it's like we're talking about a band that's they already know that they're going to break up.
Right.
There was
At the top of their game, pretty much.
Yeah, and it's like, so obviously there's cracks in the band.
Yeah.
They're not the Fab Four that they were at the very beginning.
Yeah.
But still,
Yeah.
to write the music that they did on this album
Yeah.
is incredible. So obviously the Beatles break up. This is their last album.
Yeah.
Do you think that it was a good move on the Beatles' part to break up? Or do you feel like, oh, they should have stayed together. They should have kept on going.
Well, I think it was kind of really, it was probably time, and it was and they were all feeling their oats at that point. At that point, they each had people, going, you're the real star, forget that John Lennon guy, he's, or everybody, whispering in each other's ear, and they had, had the whole Apple fiasco.
Oh, yeah.
They maybe bit a little more off than they could chew with that. And then they had, they had different ideas of who they wanted to be their legal representation and their management after Brian Epstein died. And, so they were all kind of going in different directions. And
They did the right thing.
it was, yeah. And the thing a lot of people don't, a lot of people are like, these guys never matched, arguably, they never matched, let's say, the level of hysteria that with their solo work. But if you look at like the first few years after, let's say the Beatles just decided to say, nah, we're going to take a break maybe. And instead of, let's say, McCartney and Lennon and all those guys just releasing some of their solo albums they did over the first couple years of the 70s. And let's say they brought those songs to the Beatles and had that. I would say that if you had an album that had Imagine, Instant Karma, Uncle Albert, Maybe I'm Amazed, Ringo Starr, Photograph, what was some of George Harrison's early ones, like maybe,
Hallelujah.
My Sweet Lord or whatever. Not a big fan of that song. It's kind of a ripoff anyway. But, some of the stuff that he had early on, if you were to take a bunch of those songs and put them together, that'd be one hell of a Beatles album. And think about how they might sound a little different, So, arguably, that was just where they were going. Or you could say, well, none of them touches, Sgt. Pepper or what have you, Band on the Run versus,
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of the Grey Album?
No, I don't think so.
There's Ethan Hawke, the actor.
Yeah.
He was in a movie called Boyhood that came out.
Mm-hmm.
And in this movie, he gives his son what he calls the Grey Album, and it's essentially it's like a mixtape that he made, but it's like a CD.
Okay.
And he's like, this is the Grey Album, and the kid's like, what's the Grey Album? He's like, well, you know how the Beatles have the White Album. Well, there's the Grey Album, and this would be all the best songs. If you'd have one album with all the best songs from all the solo, from some of the solo albums. So he did it.
Oh, okay. And this was in a movie. Okay.
It's in a movie.
All right.
Boyhood. You'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
There you go. I think about that now as we're talking about that. I am so glad that the Beatles never did get back together.
Yes. Yes.
Because you were talking about that. Because you're talking. Because that could have happened. Say they went off, did a couple solo albums each.
And maybe 1979 decided, like how they had that.
Could you imagine if the Beatles would have gotten back together in the 80s?
Well, it'd be tough without John Lennon, because I think he died like in 1980.
Yeah, that's true.
But, if they would have done like in 78 or 79, let's say. Yeah. If they would have been like, saw that Sgt. Pepper movie and been like, fuck that noise.
Hey gang, this is Ray, and I just want to say thank you very much for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to see more videos, please click on the subscribe button. And if you like what you see, please give it a like. That would mean a lot to me. And if you're wondering why I'm wearing Hawaiian shirts, well, when I'm not talking about records, I'm talking about my other love, Tiki. I have a show called Tiki with Ray. If you want to check that show out, just search Tiki with Ray on YouTube. It'll come up.